if their existing tech doesn't solve a problem, or once we've done that audit and we can't find a tool that can solve it, what is your advice for then going out into the wider world and finding that new tool that we should consider?
Yeah, definitely. So that link that Gary's given you as well, the template will definitely help guide you with that. I mean, it's super simple. It's just something I use all the time with my team at many different tech organizations that you can work through. But the bulk of breaking it down is you kind of have this pre-analysis phase. So we've covered that in some ways of defining what your problem is. So what is the thing that you're trying to solve? And then you can make kind of like then, if you call it a micro list under that of what are your non-negotiables. So your non-negotiables are fundamentally what are those things that you can't basically live without? It has to have. It's at the top of the list. So you can definitely cross out a lot of people based on those non-negotiables. And your first kind of protocol is to investigate what's available. So you could do this pretty easily. Like I say, we've spoken about, and we'll speak more about referrals, recommendations, using Google searches, etc., what's out there, who's talking. And based upon your context, what I would suggest you do is get to a short list of about 5 suppliers. I mean, don't go crazy because there's hundreds of people out there, but get to about 5 suppliers and then take time to look at their website. So a lot of, this is for anything really, not just L&D, but a lot of good products will have websites where there's case studies, they talk about use cases, they have, blogs where they're talking about how people are using the tool. You can see tool features. Maybe some of them will do, live tutorials that you can watch. Do that research for about, not huge, like half hour to an hour for each of those vendors. And then use that template that is in my post there to basically walk through and answer all the questions that are on there. Because then once you get to the end of that and you've got your 5 suppliers, you've answered all those questions, you kind of assigned a rating, you find out about the costs. Your kind of first part is then to look at that with either yourself, if you're one person N&D team, or other people in your HR team, or look at that with your senior leaders and say, look, this is what we've identified so far. And then at that point, it's just having a bit of a conversation and you give them some recommendations. So it's more you coming in with data to say, these are 5 that we've looked at. I really like X, Y, and Z. And then saying, I think we should do this, and then have that conversation. And then post that is then basically to start to engage those companies. So you can start to go out to maybe 3 of those companies and go, okay, really interested in seeing, what you can do. Love to learn more about that. Can we set up a call? Most of these will go through kind of a pre-sale stage where they want to learn more about you, which is very good because from a contextual standpoint, it helps them as well have that conversation around what are the problems you're trying to solve. So when I say have that problem already, that really helps a vendor to then go, oh, okay, I see you're trying to solve XYZ. So I can then actually talk to you about the features that we have to do that instead of just saying, I need an LMS or an NXP because someone in my organization told me that we need one. It's not really helpful for you. It's not really helpful for a vendor on that part there. So you do that. And then once you've kind of gone through the pre-analysis phase, you've gone through kind of the next analysis phase, you get to a point where you've spoken to 3 people, and then you can start to think about, okay, so I've seen more about the tool. You should definitely get a demo, like spend time getting a demo, like a 45-minute demo with that organization and walking through what does it do, look at the ins and outs, understanding that from a top layer, and then take away that data. And again, go back to having a conversation with your team or the people that are involved or need to be involved in that conversation. And then again, giving your recommendation and saying, what do you like from there? And what I would say at this point is you've got kind of 2 routes. Either you can say, you know, we can try to get maybe like a short pilot with 3 of them, or maybe pilot's the wrong word, maybe a short test. So every company's different. I don't know every company's processes, but you could ask the vendor to say, look, we'd love to test a demo environment for a week or 2, just so our senior leaders and our key people can take a look at the environment. They can play around with it. They can see how it works, etc., etc. That is just helping you validate what you're doing. And it's also validating that user experience with your ideal customer, because it's great you've seen it as an L&D person, but actually you want to get a selection of maybe about 20 to 30 people who can just dive in and they can just spend some time on it and they can just give you some feedback, which gives you a kind of diverse set of thoughts on how this could land in the organization. So you could definitely do that as a first port of call for a demo. Based on that demo and the feedback you get, you might get down to two or one vendors. Okay. And at that point, what you want to do is you're kind of in what I call the serious conversation stage, and you're talking about kind of costs and implementation. I think the first thing to look at is, can you do a pilot agreement? And a pilot agreement usually is, from my experience, has been some kind of reduced cost, and you get a set of licenses for your organization or a portion of your organization, let's say for 8 weeks. And over those 2 months, and I've done this with basically all my suppliers, you can work with that supplier to look at how can we understand, is this going to validate what we think our people need in the wider audience, and then how can we look at making this work? How can we actually see real time data on, is this helping out our organization? Is it enhancing what we're doing, or is it hindering? And this is the best way to do it, because until you actually use these tools and you're using them day in, day out, and other people are using them, you don't really know. A demo is one thing, a live environment is another. So you need to be able to spend time to say, is this helping me do work faster and at high quality, or is it actually slowing me down? And then you can get really clear on that, because you don't want to be in a position where you say, yes, it's worked by a 2-year license. Then you figure out 6 weeks later, actually, the thing that you thought was going to help you work faster and smarter is not doing it. It's taking too much time. It's not working. So, if you can, definitely get that demo. Make sure that demo has enough licenses to go to the key people in your organization that have the time. I stress having the time, because you'll want to give it to leaders and stuff, you know, of all the will in the world, they might be sponsoring, but they're not going to go into it and have the time to actually do that. If you can get it in front of the people who are going to be using it from a main user perspective and get their feedback, that is going to be critical. And then once you've done that, I think the main thing then to do, of course, is you work with the vendors, you talk to them about, is this something based on the data that you've got that you can see working? Yes, no. Of course, the obvious is, if it's yes, you can continue to purchase. If it's no, then you don't. And you might have to repeat that cycle again. It happens sometimes. You might get a couple of tools, you might think, oh, they're really good. But then when you get them into a live environment, it doesn't quite work. And I'll give you an example of this at one organization where I was bringing on a OKR tool for objective and key results in a tech company. I went through a couple of cycles of this, because we were working with loads of companies. Some of them just specifically focused on OKRs. Some of them did loads of stuff that we didn't want, but we just wanted the OKRs on that system. So we had to go for a couple of cycles of testing, demoing. But what happened with that is that, although it took 3 to 4 months, we got the right tool in the end. And we signed actually a quite a long-term contract, because we got the right tool. And we found what worked for us in the context of the people and what we were trying to achieve. So the importance of that was, we could have actually gone for any of those tools quite quickly and signed a deal, and then to figure out, actually, we now need to get out of that deal, or God forbid, have signed that deal for a year, then buy another tool to fix what that other tool couldn't do, and then have two contracts running at the same time. So it can sound like high effort, but what I'd invite you to think about is, what if you don't do it? If you don't do it, you could be in a nightmare situation, which I've inherited from taking over at companies before, where they've signed multiple contracts long term with companies that you end up suffering with later on, because it hits budgets, costs increase every year. So I think I'd always encourage people, as I say, to think about, what if you don't do this stuff? If you just rush and make these decisions, it's not always going to work. And I think I would always say, and I'm going to say this because I was talking about the things that I've done, that the reason why I've always worked with a lot of the companies I have done for 3 to 5 years is because we've tested them so rigorously, and we've looked at what they could do. We've kind of kept up with them every year. I'm probably one of the worst persons to chase down product teams and get product updates, and that I am one of those weirdos. So it's stuff like that where those have stayed with me for a long time, because we made the effort up front to say what fits specifically for our organization. And the other caveat to that is going to be as well, especially if you're in a scale up, as you mature, tools are going to come and go. So there's going to be a tool that might fit for this year that's not going to fit for next year, because you might quickly go from 100 people, and then, if you're getting that crazy Silicon Valley money, you might jump up and go to 600 people next year, and you're in a different boat. So you definitely have to flex on what you're looking at. I think more in a scale up environment, because it's easy for me to say think infinite game, but it's not always easy to do that in a scale up when, if you are rapidly growing. So definitely to consider what would happen if you don't do this, and also be looking at where you can definitely test the hell out of everything that you can with people. And then when you're signing contracts, as I say, more for scale ups and startups, you're probably looking at 12 months, right? That's kind of the maximum. I would not be advising anyone to sign 3 4 year crazy contracts with organizations, especially when you first started working with them, because again, a year is good for you and the vendor, because you could be the vendor's worst nightmare for you, and they might want to get out from you. So we have to kind of figure out, does it work both ways for people, and does it continue to serve your organization, depending upon how you're growing as an organization too. So those would be, I suppose, very loose principles that I would encourage you to kind of take away and experiment with them in your own domain.